I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. You are worthy of
Wow. Well, the day is finally here. I was, up to the very last minute, I was thinking of ways to get out of it. I could fake an injury off the back of the riser. But I just want to thank Thomas again for coming and leading with us this morning, brother. Man. Tell you what, I love hearing that man sing. And it also, we're a compassionate church here at Blossom Valley Bible Church. And having me lead worship and preach, that would have been a little too much, Jim, even for me. So thank you very much, Thomas. Okay, I thought that we would begin this morning's festivities with a pop quiz. I know that hopefully none of you have prepared for it, hence the pop quiz part. But on a list of the top 10 things that people fear the most, adult Americans, the top 10 things that they fear the most, do you know what consistently ranks at number 1? But there goes all the funny stuff I put in there, because you guessed it. You guessed it right off. I should have known that y'all would be bold, and it is. But I'm going to say this part anyway. It's not nuclear war or civil war. It's not an alien invasion or a home invasion. It is not the Republicans. It is not the Democrats. It is not Kim Jong-un or Kim Kardashian. It is not zombies, werewolves, lions, tigers, or bears. Oh my, thank you. I was hoping you'd come in on that one. You're right, it is public speaking. Getting up in front of a group of people and just talking. Absolutely terrifying for a lot of people. On that same list, the one that I used to compile my information for the message, dying was only at number 5. Can you imagine being less afraid to die than to speak in front of a crowd? I can't say that my fear is that extreme, but it was up there. It was up there. I was the guy that in high school, I played in the orchestras for the musicals. Played percussion and drums, and I was off to the side. And all those nutcases were up in front, singing and dancing and carrying on. I was safe on the side. Not up in front of everybody, alone and defenseless. Yeah. The title of my message, is it? No, it's not up there. It was in the bulletin. It was, "What Am I Doing Here?" And when you see something printed, you don't get the inflection, right? So for example, that same statement can be interpreted in a number of ways depending on how you inflect, right? For example, you could do the Seinfeld thing like, "What am I doing here?" Right? Or it could be, "What am I doing here?" Right? Or "What am I doing here?" My intention is, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? It's a question that I ask myself on a regular basis. It's a question that I ask from a place of deep humility and overwhelming gratitude. It is a question that I ask my God. What am I doing here when a lot of my friends are gone? What am I doing here after I wasted so much time chasing after idols? What am I doing here? Because I spent years living as though I did not need God. What am I doing here? That question is a response to my own story, my own miracle. A few years ago, one of my colleagues at work, he's kind of a grumpy guy, but I came to know him and why he was grumpy is because I work at a very loosely, that's a kind word, organized music store. You know, we sell happiness for a living. It was started by a couple hippie concert promoters, and they have maintained this climate of laissez-faire for 52 years, believe it or not. Well, my friend is in charge of shipping and receiving and doing the orders, and arguably the hardest job in the store. And it's like trying to herd cats. They don't follow orders. So Tim is grumpy, but he's my buddy, right? So it kind of surprised me one morning when he said, "Jim, can I ask you?" He goes, why are you always in a good mood? So I gave him, I kind of live for those moments. I gave him the 2-minute version of what I'm going to talk about this morning. How through Jesus Christ, every day is a gift to me. Every day is a gift. And he looked me right in the eye, and I could tell he wasn't sure how to respond, but he said, "Dude, whatever you're doing, keep it up." Well, this week is Thanksgiving, and I know that I'm talking to the right group of people when I say that when you have Jesus in your life, every day is Thanksgiving. Amen? My path to Jesus wasn't a straight one, but by no means. There were a few detours, and as a result, there were some really, really dark days. Times when I felt that the happy days were behind me, that I had blown my chance, and that the remainder of my life would be spent merely existing, no longer engaging in a real life with real relationships. My aim this morning is to tell you all, my church family, what I am doing here. To do so accurately, I need to tell my story. And after telling that story, I want to tell you, or share with you rather, what was revealed to me about the God that we all serve. As an old comedian used to say, I started out as a child. I was born in 1958, right up the peninsula in San Mateo, California. My father was in the Army, and shortly after I was born, within a year, we moved to Germany. While we were in Germany, 2 very significant events occurred. My little sister, Signa, was born, and my father, who was an alcoholic, began beating my mother. Upon returning to the States, my mom filed for divorce, and by 1961, the 3 of us were living with my grandparents in Menlo Park. And my grandfather ran a restaurant. I think it was called the Hofbrauhaus, and my mom waitressed there several nights a week. And one of the regulars was a transplanted Texan by the name of George Tanner. George was a few years younger than my mom, and by all accounts, he had it going on. He had a 1956 2-door Buick that had a Ham's beer tap thing on the shifter lever. And he never, ever lost a game of pool, at least that anyone knew. He worked in construction, but he was taking night classes in electronics because he had this notion that electronics might catch on in this area, right? They were married in April of 1962, and looking back on that, I realized that that event was one of the first real God moments in my life, when God showed up and provided for us. You see, he had everything by earthly standards, right? But he gave up a lot of freedom. He was 24 years old. He took on this instant family, this huge responsibility. And that's my dad. So shortly after they were married, my parents moved to San Jose, and they bought a home for $15,000. And to put that in perspective, that's like 2 years of my property taxes today. They purchased this home. It was a new development amongst the orchards. Remember those? Yeah, they're like trees, a bunch of trees and stuff, fruit trees. But we had 3 little streets. And I can still remember, my elementary school was at one end of the block, my middle school was at the other end. Prunes, apricots, cherries, walnuts. We were like a half a mile from the creek. The creek. We would take off my mom would always tell us, don't get wet. She just knew that creek water was full of cholera or diphtheria or whatever. I just knew it had crawdads in it, man. And we were going to go down, we'd sneak some bacon out of the kitchen, we'd go and we'd catch crawdads. We wouldn't come home until the dinner bell rang. Well, it didn't actually ring. Like Bonanza, we didn't have a dinner bell. We did not have a dinner bell. I just knew you had to be home by supper time. And there were no worries. It was just a wonderful place to grow up. Before too long, maybe within 6 months or so after arriving in San Jose, we found a little Lutheran church because my mom, being half Norwegian, felt drawn to the faith of her childhood. And so we were now Lutherans. The pastor at the time, Pastor Russell, he seemed like a giant to me. He probably wasn't, but he had this booming voice, and it was very resonant, and he used his voice to great effect. Because you would do the litany, right? So he would sing, and there'd be response. So whether he was singing or, and this is a true story, denouncing the communists from the pulpit. He was beating on the pulpit like Khrushchev and shouting. I was in awe. The pastor was scary. And by association, God was scary. He was really scary. As far as I knew, God was far away, but what I'd heard was he was pretty mad. But it wasn't all bad and scary. I had memorized like what the pastor would sing. So as a kid, I would sing along, and my mom was, come on. So I've always been singing in church in one way or the other. In fact, if you ask me, I probably could sing that whole litany from start to finish, the Lutheran service. I did all the usual kid stuff. I went to Sunday school, vacation Bible school, and I joined the youth group in preparation for confirmation when I was 11. Life outside the church, fairly normal. I was a decent student when I wanted to be what I was prone to being, a class clown. My mom taught me to read when I was before kindergarten. So reading and writing, that became my strong suit. Okay, that's what comes next. In fact, with the reading thing, my mom had to go down to the school when I was in the 2nd grade and let the teacher know that it was okay if I checked out that book on Greek mythology that was in the 5th grade section. So by third grade, it was a couple significant things. It's always happening in pairs. You're going to notice that through this message. There's a couple significant things that seem to happen to me at the same time. 3rd grade was significant because I was told I had to wear glasses. Oh, man. Glasses. Do you know how many pairs of glasses I broke in the 3rd grade? It takes a while to get used to them. So I had to start wearing glasses, and I also started music lessons on accordion. I know. There was this guy going door to door, and he was selling lessons. He had a little 12-button accordion about yay big, just sized for a little guy. And I begged, please, I want just anything with music. Piano was obviously out of the question. Drums, yeah, right. But accordion, remember I mentioned that my mom was half Lutheran? Guess who else? Half Lutheran, half Norwegian. Okay, don't worry, we'll edit that out in post-production. She was half Norwegian. Well, guess who else? Yeah, Lawrence Welk, arguably the most famous accordion player in the world. So it wasn't hard to talk him into doing lessons. And then it came time to move to that big accordion. $600 in 1967. My parents made me a bargain. They said, if you continue lessons for a year, we'll get this accordion. And I ended up taking them for almost 6 years. So I upheld my end of the bargain. And what an amazing gift that accordion was to me, because it gave me an understanding of the keyboard. Not like Debbie has, but close enough I can get around on a keyboard. And who knew that pushing those buttons without looking at them for the guitar. It worked perfectly. I had no idea. I just knew I'd be sitting in the front room practicing, and I'd hear the kids out playing in the street, playing football, and I'd be, oh man, I hope they're out there when I get done with this. So I put in my time. I deserve to play a cool instrument these days. Yeah. Yeah, even back then, music was a really big part of my life. I was named for a musician, a good friend of my mom and dad's. And growing up, I heard everything from show tunes to real country music. Not this rock and roll with hats stuff. Real. I know, was that mean? I shouldn't be saying mean things. I know, I apologize to the world, I guess. But, my early influences musically were everything from, Rodgers and Hammerstein and Leonard Bernstein to Lefty Frizzell and Johnny Cash. But as I got older, I tried sneaking in, some of that rock and roll stuff. And we had a few confrontations. I was banned from the stereo on a number of occasions. But all the way through school, and to this day even, I'm in contact with some of these people. We had a little core group. So I always had people with me. From the time I was in elementary school all through high school. This little group of friends. Many of us had been friends even before school. So I was fortunate that I was never the new kid. Thank God. Can you imagine if I had to go to a new school? Let's refresh. I was a skinny kid that wore glasses. I liked to read, and I played the accordion. There is a very good chance that I would probably still be stuck in a locker somewhere. All right, so that was life outside the church. We're going to cut back over to what was going on at the Faith Lutheran Church. The Lutherans are what they call a high church. They're very similar to Catholicism in that there is a set pattern every Sunday, the litany that you go through. It's structured, and so is their membership requirements are structured as well. So they have a confirmation program similar to the Catholic catechism. This happens when you're 14 years old. You get confirmed into the church. Prior to that, you do 3 years. You attend classes. You perform duties as an acolyte, which is the Lutheran word for altar boy. You light the candles and help with communion, assist the pastor. Then after confirmation, you receive a little certificate and your own box of offering envelopes. That's how you know that you're officially part of the church. So I went through that process. I was the acolyte, and I went to the classes. I ended up with my certificate, my box of envelopes. And as far as the church was concerned, I was a member. But in actuality, I felt no different than I had ever felt. I had managed to participate in all of the ritual without ever really meeting God. As far as I could tell, as I mentioned earlier, God was far away, and he was always angry about something. A couple of events happened around this time, that resulted in my making a very serious decision concerning my position about God and the church. I was very interested in science. I always had been. An interest that I still have today. In school, there were about 5 of us who, as freshmen, we blew through all the science units in about half a trimester. So they moved us into biology. So we move into the biology class, and they are talking about evolution, the theory of evolution and the origin of our species. Now, to my mind, this theory seemed to answer a lot of the questions in a scientific way. Where I had come from, what was I supposed to, not necessarily what I was supposed to be doing here, but definitely where I came from and where I was going to go. Another event that happened around that time was that I became aware of inconsistent behavior among church-going adults. On Sunday nights, I would go with my uncle, I would go with my uncle to play either guitar or bass at his church. My Uncle Richard had played drums. In fact, he was one of my first drum instructors. And I was happy to help when he asked me. I said, sure. I was learning to play guitar and bass, and they needed help, and I wanted to play music. So I would go and play at my uncle's church. I can't exactly tell you the denomination of the church. The only thing I can say is that my folks call it a holy roller church. I'm assuming it was a Pentecostal of some sort, a charismatic Pentecostal. And every week, there were people like leaping about and shouting, speaking in tongues, out of control. But I would see these same people sometimes right after the church service. And they did not act holy at all. The details of this particular story are not really mine to share, but suffice to say that the hypocrisy it just wounded me, because what it made me think was that if they're lying about that, if this is all a sham, what if the whole thing is a sham? Right? What if what they think being a Christian is just an act? What if it's all an act? What if it's all just a huge fabrication created in the mind of man to answer all the big questions in life? The third event in this little trilogy is that my parents no longer compelled me to go to church. They left it up to me, and I made my choice. I rejected the institutions of organized religion, and in doing so, I, in essence, threw the baby out with the bathwater, because I found myself rejecting God as well. Science had the answers, and religion was just a big, corrupt, money-making machine. There's a popular quotation. I was unable to really hone in on the source. Some people say it was St. Augustine, others say it was Pascal. But it's the notion that man exists with this God-shaped hole in his heart. An empty space that can only be filled by the right relationship with the Lord. I would spend the next 25 years trying to fill that void. One of my first and most enduring attempts to fill the hole in my heart, it came from alcohol, marijuana, and later on, just about anything I could get my hands on. I started with the drinking in my teenage years. It was fun, and I found that I had a knack for it. I know that is a dubious distinction at best, but I became known as a party animal and created an identity around that behavior. In psychosocial terms, child development, my crisis was that of identity versus isolation. Identity versus isolation. That was solved by my adoption of this party persona. I became something that I was not when I drank. I was Keith Richards, man. I was Jim Morrison. I was Jimi Hendrix. No matter that two of those three are dead, and the third one looks like he might be. That's what I became. I didn't want to be in my skin. I didn't want to be the skinny kid with glasses that had to have his hair cut short till he was a senior in high school. I wanted to be hip, slick, and cool, man. And that's what I could do when I altered my brain a little bit. I could become something I wasn't. Brother George talked about the old days, those days of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, due to my habits and my genetic predisposition, I found out that as long as there were drugs, And believe me, alcohol is a drug. I could do without the other two. After graduating from high school, I went into the Air Force. See, as a kid, my dream was to fly jets. But because I didn't have 20/20 vision, I had to go to my second choice, which was to be a cop. I absolutely loved police shows. I watched everything out there, Adam 12, Dragnet, Hawaii Five-0. I wanted to be a cop, man. I wanted to help people. Well, to be honest, I wanted to drive fast and be around guns. It just sounded like a great job. So, and my plan was to spend 4 years in the Air Force and then get out and join a civilian department. Well, as it turns out, that 4 years as a military policeman showed me that I was not really cut out to be a cop. You know, I'm not confrontational, and, you know, besides, being a cop would have really interfered with my partying. My time in the military, however, did take my drinking to a whole new level. The drinking age was 18, and the alcohol was cheap, especially when I got to the Philippines. I got into trouble with my drinking. I have never been in any trouble with the law, other than maybe I think I ran a stop sign, I have one speeding ticket. Anything beyond that is chalk it up to alcohol. I got into trouble in the Philippines to the point where they had to stamp my ID with big red letters, says IH. It means International Hold. I'd gotten into an altercation with a Filipino constabulary, right? You know, my guy said it was his fault. He said it was my fault. He was a captain in the police force. So I got put on the international hold, and it took a really, really savvy military lawyer and about $250 American for me to buy my freedom out of that. Wow. I just flashed on something. It's not in the script, but I have to mention it because it was another weird thing I saw there that pushed me even further away from religion. And they do this really crazy, almost voodoo-like procession at Easter time, where they have a volunteer who takes this huge cross, as big as that one that we used to have sitting over here, has a little wheel on the end of it, and they push a crown of thorns on his head, and he's bloody, and these people whip themselves. And that just freaked me out. It pushed me even further away from any kind of association with religion. What a scary thing. What a scary thing to see. Well, I returned to the States, and I finished out my tour at Nellis Air Base, which is right on the outskirts of Las Vegas. That's a boring little no-party kind of town, right? I continued my wild ways. I got sent into a rehab program because I showed up to the monthly commander's call where you report in front of the captain. I'd been up all night, smelled like a brewery. Well, they sent me to this rehab, and at that time the cutting edge thing was electrostatic aversion therapy. Yeah, I know. In other words, they hook these electrodes up to your arm, and you sit there with your drink of choice. In this case, it was a Budweiser beer. And as you would start to drink it, they'd shock you. Yeah, that's how they train rats, right? To go to the right part of the... Well, what I came away from that was that I didn't stop drinking, but I hate getting shocked to this day. It's like, don't even start that with me. And at one point, I went to a friend's church. A fellow airman had invited me to his church. Oh boy, I'm watching the time. Had invited me to his church, rather, and after about the sixth time, I agreed to go. And you know what? Here's another one of those bad church experiences. The pastor from the church, from the pulpit, as they were passing around the offering, he said, "All right, I don't want to see any Washingtons or Lincolns in that plate. I want to see some Jeffersons and whoever the guy on the tin is, Hamilton." From the pulpit. My friend was mortified, and I just chalked it up. Money-making machine, right? That's what I thought. Yeah. I have some out of way. Okay. Well, in 1980, I was honorably discharged, believe it or not. And I returned to my parents' house in San Jose. The following year, I started attending Evergreen Valley College. with the intention of transferring to San Jose State as a biology major. I was supplementing my GI benefits by playing in nightclub bands 3 nights a week. And as I delved deeper into science, it seemed like the fewer questions that they really had solid answers for. The deeper you got into the intricacies of the world, the more vague the answers from science were. In the fall of 1983, again, notable for 2 significant things. I got married for the first time, and God showed up in a biology lab. Let me explain. It was in microbiology class. We're doing a unit on cells, and I'm looking down the microscope, and it's amazing, all these little parts, the cell nucleus and the mitochondria and the organelles. And it wasn't a burning bush. It wasn't an audible voice. It was a certainty that came over me at that moment, a certainty that said, this is not an accident. This is not an accident. From that point on, I believed in God. Now, it would still be another 14 years until I received Christ. And it would be another 14 years living with that hole in my heart. Because quite simply, there's a huge difference between knowing about God and knowing God. You know, the financial demands of being married made it necessary for me to find full-time work. My brother-in-law at the time worked at a construction company, and he hired me on he got me hired on as a helper. Well, I had a knack for building things. I'd built scale models since I was old enough to, keep the glue off of everything. So I had a knack for it, and I was eager to learn. And I became their coved floor guy. When you do the linoleum, it comes up the wall, about 4 inches. Well, I took the lessons from the guy and learned how to pattern it. It was very intricate, but it was rewarding, and the results were beautiful. And so I jumped at the chance. And I'm still grateful to those guys for teaching me, for taking me on. But, as you might imagine, my first marriage was a real roller coaster ride. Because of my immaturity and my addiction, I was just a terrible husband. Years later, I'd find out that the prevailing wisdom is that your emotional development stops when you start. In other words, I had the emotional makeup of a 14-year-old trying to pretend to be an adult, a married adult. The deck was stacked against me. I didn't know. So to avoid condemnation and conflict at home, I would just stay away. If I hooked up with the boys and got hammered, I didn't want to get yelled at or put in the doghouse, so I would just stay away. I would eventually come home and I'd feel bad. And because I felt bad, I would want to drink again. And then because I drank again, I would feel bad. And it was just this horrible circle, this snake consuming its own tail. And the final blow came from a comment that wasn't even really voiced. It was extrapolated on my part. She had been raised as Jehovah's Witness. Anna was her name. And she went back to the faith during our marriage because I was putting her through hell. And she needed something. She needed her family. So she went back to that church. And I actually went to one of their meetings. Now, at that time, I didn't know that they were a cult and they had their own Bible to, justify their beliefs. All I knew was that they sang their worship songs to a cassette. That was an abomination to me. I'm sorry. I would give me that Lutheran organ, but for heaven's sake, don't sing to a cassette. So I knew that I would never be a member of that church. And one day Anna made the comment that nothing would ever make her happier than if I was a member of the church. That's what she said. What I heard, because I knew what was in my heart, was that she's never going to be happy. She's never going to be happy. So We agreed, to sell our house and terminate the marriage. And in September of '94, I drove away from my house on Lean Avenue with a few $100s. Still had that hole in my heart, which by now was as big as my life. I bounced from couch to couch, wearing out my welcome, pushing my friends even further away. Drinking had lost any fun factor that it ever had and became merely a mechanism to drown out the memories so I could go to sleep at night. I had alienated everyone in my old life. I sought out some new friends, and they were a crowd that was using methamphetamine. So I got into that. I was broken, I was lonely, and I just wanted to be accepted somewhere, anywhere. I was able to work, but only sporadically, absolutely undependable. I was on the fringe of real life. I was just peeking through the windows at all the normal people. Well, I'd hooked up with a little construction outfit that was doing some work. I'm not going to go that part right now. I had something written here, and I was going to avoid it, but I shouldn't, because it needs to be said that I will never forget the pain in my dad's voice when he told me not to call anymore because it hurt my mom too bad. I'll never forget that. I was working a little job with this company. It was a commercial job, changing out the carpet over at Blossom Hill and Snell. I was walking out to the van to get some tools. As I turned to go back in, I heard somebody call. I heard somebody call me. And I turned around, and it was an old friend of mine. I hadn't seen her in a couple of years. She was with her son coming out of Payless. She was now single. So we exchanged numbers. We ended up, dating. I invited her to a barbecue at my buddy's house. And one day she asked me, well, what's going on with you and the Lord? She'd been a follower of Christ for a while. And I said, what? She asked, what's going on? I said, God doesn't bother me. He's worried about the good people. I don't bother God, and God does not bother me. To which she replied, I don't think that's the way it works. A bit bold, perhaps, but true nonetheless. She invited me to hear some blues music at her church, which that sounded amazing, just to see what that was. That blues music in church? You're talking to an ex-Lutheran here. Our greatest hits were from the 1840s or what have you. But sure enough, she was attending a vineyard church, and I went there, and his name was Danny Daniels, and he was just amazing. He's become a friend of mine since, but he was one of the early vineyard recording artists. And after that, she invited me to her church, and I was blown away by the music. And I was thinking, man, there could even be a place for me, kind of, playing this music. But the condition I was in at that time, I still had one foot, sometimes my whole body, in my old life. And my friend said, I can't have this. I'm not going to stand around while you destroy yourself. Get fixed and give me a call. Well, I did that. After being up for about 3 or 4 days, I found myself in West San Jose in a friend's truck that I had borrowed for a couple of hours with broken transmission linkage. I was stuck. It was at Saratoga and Prospect. And I prayed. I said, God, help me. If you can help me stop drinking, everything else will follow suit. The drugs, that was always the thing where I could put it away. But if I got some drink in me, it would lower my resistance and my resolve, and I'd be right back in there. Well, I had a friend of mine, I think I met Mike in the 7th grade. I knew that he'd been sober about a year. Now, I had always had trouble remembering his phone number because it was very close to another. That night after I prayed, it came into my head as clear as a bell. The second crazy thing was that there was a phone booth in the parking lot. A phone booth. I mean, there's certainly, I don't think there's any left, but at that time they were on the way out. They were rare, but there was a phone booth. I called Mike. I said, Mike, I've had enough. He said, Jim, if that's the truth, come on over. So I walked to his place, which was at Winchester and Williams. So I had a good little trek. I think he wanted to know that I was serious. I got to Mike's. The very next day, they put me into what they call a sober living house. And I spent 30 days there, kind of getting myself together. And while I was there, I let my friend know where I was at, and she seemed genuinely pleased to know that I was taking care of myself. And she came to visit, and then when I got out of the little sober living house, started going to church. And yeah, this is always kind of tough to get out, but that's her. That's my friend. That's my friend. That's my friend that challenged me and told me I was full of it. Booted me to the curb because I was killing myself. Well, I started going back to, I was working construction again. I was attending church regularly. And the pastor, Dave Jacobs, he was about my age, and he really helped to put a human face on God, much like my friend had done. I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I was baptized in August of '97. Because I'd been baptized as an infant, but I'm not quite so sure that took. So at this point in time, I felt that my friend and her obedience to Jesus were the best thing that had ever happened to me. And I never wanted to lose her. So I asked her to marry me. And fortunately, she said yes. And as you know, it's Tina. We were married in 1998, and we delayed our honeymoon so that we could be at the grand opening of a church that we had planted. We were part of a church plant. And in December of that year, I played my guitar in church for the first time in 24 years. In '99, we were blessed with a daughter. And I never knew how much you could need something that you had never had. And I came away also believing in love at first sight. It was just an amazing, amazing thing. And Tina had a son, so now I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a wife. I have a life. I went back to college in '99 and into the pastoral ministry program because I wanted to be a pastor like Dave. He was incredible, what he did for me. I know I was going to talk about my story and some things I learned about God, but I have eaten up the time like you would not believe. And I'm not going to keep y'all 1 minute past 11. But I'll tell you this, my journey is not, it's unique to me, but it's not unusual. The Lord is restoring people all around the world, all the time. From the moment that Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, God has been working to get us back. We were created for community. We need to be together like we are this morning. And we were created for community with Him. That when we pass from this earth, we're reunited with Him. Through my journey, I know that God's love is unconditional and unfathomable. I was the worst, but when I decided to come home, He ran to me. He ran. I know that God had a plan for me. I didn't. I thought that He was worried about the good people, didn't care about me. Little did I know that my name was carved into the palm of His hand. I know that He's a God of mercy because He didn't give me what I deserved. I deserved to go straight to hell. Instead, I get to be here with my church family on this Sunday morning. I know that he's a God of grace because he's provided so much for me that I don't deserve. A loving family, a new job at the church, leading worship with y'all. That is just amazing. Me! What am I doing here? Is this the right gym, Swanson? If you would have told me back in the day that I'd be here, I would have said, yeah. Can I have whatever you're smoking? That's what, it's unbelievable. I know that God is a redeemer and a restorer. A redeemer and a restorer. As a result of my path, it's given me a unique opportunity for ministry. And I think about the passage in Genesis where Joseph encounters his brothers, and they threw him in a well, they sold him into slavery, and he forgives them. And the phrase that he said, what you meant for evil, God has meant for good. Because I tell you, for a while, I didn't even want to think about my past. I didn't want to think about the time, the money I'd wasted, the people I'd hurt. But he gave me an opportunity to minister to addicts and alcoholics because of my own story. I'm fortunate to be in a band with Steve, our bass player. We're called Isaiah, and that's who we minister to, are the addicts and the alcoholics, my people. And I get to give them some hope and some strength. And I know that God is a God of forgiveness. I know that I'm totally forgiven because God has given me a sign that he trusted me. Right? It's one thing to be forgiven, but you go that next step and you gain the trust again. And when I held that little girl in my arms, I knew that he trusted me. And that was huge. I'm like a minute over, but I have to leave you with something that I got from the Lutherans. This is the benediction, and it goes like this. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord be gracious unto all of you. May the Lord turn his face upon you and grant you all peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you, and amen.
I will worship with all of my heart, as I will praise you with all of my strength. I will seek you